All right, now that we've made a scanner, it's imported, let's use it for something. So I've added a bunch of other stuff where it just prompts the user to enter something, and then I've got it so it'll print out the thing. So first thing we might want to get from the user is an int. So we could do it like this. We could say, hey, int num, or you can call it whatever you want, but I've got it set up for int num. And then instead of making it equal 5 or whatever, you'd make it equal to whatever the name of your scanner is. And for me, I like input. So int num equals input dot next int. And then it'll be equal to whatever the next integer is in the buffer or taken from the keyboard. There is something called a buffer that holds what people have entered so far. So that'll be a little bit confusing, but for now, let's say it's just the keyboard. We'll get to the buffer in a quick sec. So when I run it, it says enter an int number. I can enter it. I'll say 53, and then it says int num equals 53 right here. So it'll work great. I was able to enter a number, and it all worked well. Now, there are some potential pitfalls, which we'll figure out how to correct in the next section of this. Let's say I write something like that cannot be interpreted as an integer and will crash my program. Even if instead of entering an int number, I enter something that's got to be a double, again, it'll crash the program. So it's a little tricky that way. Now, let's do the same thing for a double number. So I can make a double, I'll call it double num, because that's what I'm set up to do. And again, almost exactly the same, make it equal to the name of your scanner. In this case, I called it input, and instead of next int, it's next double. And then we can make that work. So in a perfect world with a smart user, you could enter, I don't know, 32 and then 3.75, and it's all good. We said enter an int number, we entered 32, and it got saved appropriately. Same thing with their double number, it got saved appropriately. It all worked great, it's perfect, the user did it exactly right. Again, very quickly, we can crash the program if we enter something that the double number can't, that won't work as a double. It can't be represented as a double, say some random word. So that will also crash it. Again, we'll figure out a way to protect against that in the next video. There's something else weird we can do. So you notice so far we've just been taking stuff from the keyboard. Every time we hit a line that involves our scanner, it's been grabbing from the keyboard because the buffer has been empty. So if the buffer is empty, it'll fill the buffer and then consume from the buffer. It will eat a number from the buffer. But they're kind of space separated. So if I throw in, say, like a 32 and then a space, a 3.7, I'm just going to hit enter once here. And notice it grabbed the 32, set it as the int num. But then the buffer wasn't empty when it hit this line right here. So instead of prompting the keyboard again, the buffer, like it had consumed this. That wasn't in the buffer anymore, but it did have this, that 3.7 left. That got used instead of prompting the keyboard again. It's like, I've already got something I can use. And that can screw things up if you've got anything left in the buffer that you don't expect. Say I put in 32 here and then, oh crud, sorry. Let's say I do that. And I type in 32 party. So 32 will be consumed just fine, but then it'll crash once it hits the double, because instead of prompting the keyboard, it's going to try and interpret that as a double. So we got something in the buffer. Now let's try something else. We could do something called next line. So we could say, hey, we'll make a string of letters. We'll call it text, and we'll make that equal to the name of our scanner, dot next line. Now, the way it's currently set up, there'll actually be a little bit of a problem. Next line grabs the entire next line that the user types in, or grabs whatever's left in the buffer, even if it's just end of line characters. And these guys grab their numbers, but then they leave end of line characters in the buffer and nothing else. And so if we do this, we can enter our int number. We can say, hey, 32, our double, 3.7. And then notice I never got prompted for the line of text. It just assumed it was an empty string. There was nothing in it, because what it did is there was still that end of line character in the buffer after our last next double, because that kind of just grabbed the 3.7, and then there's a little end of line character where you hit enter. And so the 3.7 got used up by next double, the end of line character didn't, and so that was kind of grabbed by the next line. So mixing next int, next double, and next with next line is fraught, because you're always leaving these like end of line characters in there. One way we can deal with that is we can throw in an extra, we can just basically clear the buffer ourselves. I can do input dot next line and then just not do anything with it, because this will just go and eat whatever's left in the buffer. If you are sure there's something left in the buffer, it'll just eat it, and then you've got a nice clean buffer, and it'll actually prompt the keyboard. So at this point, we can go through it. We can enter our int, we can enter our double, and it'll actually let us enter our text. Whoop. There we go. Some good text right there. All right, and then next I want to show you dot next. So if we just want to enter one word, and what determines whether something is a word or not is whatever's separated by spaces. So let's say I want to enter a couple of words here. I'll say, hey, it's again a string because it's a group of characters. Word 1 equals input dot next. Whoop. And so that's just equal to the next space separated group of characters that the user types in, generally a word. And then we can do the same thing. We can add another word, which reasons for will come up in a sec. So I'll do string word 2 equals input dot next. If I could ever spell, then it would be a perfect world. All right, so let's run this. Maybe I'll actually skip all this stuff just so I don't have to deal with it. By the way, an excellent keyboard shortcut, if you were interested, is Control/ or Command/, and that just comments everything that is highlighted out. So now we're just on the words. So we do that. Right now we can say enter a word. Let's say type in pizza. And then word is party. And then I haven't done anything with the character bit. So that worked all great. Again, this does use the buffer. And it is space separated characters. So if I did pizza party all in one line, first use of dot next will use the first word. And then when it hits the second word, it's like, hey, I got something in the buffer. I don't need to bother the user for it. I'll just grab what's left over in the buffer, which is party. So if I do this, it's not going to prompt me for a second word. So notice I didn't have to do it. Word 1 is pizza. Word 2 is party. So try to mentally keep track of whatever's in the buffer. Normally, if you're mixing .next and .next int, .next double, junk like that, there is no problem. As long as you're only putting in kind of like one word entries every time the user uses the keyboard, usually pretty good. But if you're mixing in next line, because sometimes you need something with spaces in it, it gets fraught. A lot of times you got to clear the buffer. All right, and last one. Let's say we want to grab a character. If we want to grab a character, we need, basically we got to grab a string and then we got to get the first character from that string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, char1 is equal to, again, name of our scanner, because that's what's going to grab from the keyboard. And then I'm just going to do .next or .next line, depending on what makes the most sense. Since I only want to grab one character, .next should work as well as .next line, and it's less buggy, less prone to grabbing end-of-line characters. And I'm just, instead of grabbing the whole word that the user types in, I'm just going to grab the character at index 0. So the first character is always at index 0. And so if I do that, I should be able to grab a character, which is really good for letting the user make a choice. Like, do you want to play again? Yes or no? Input.next, .char at 0. So let's say I'm in computer science for the dollar bills, y'all. And I can add as many as I want. It's just going to grab the first character. Yeah, so it worked to grab the first character. Just so you can see it's the first character, I'll do it again with, let's say, ASDF. And notice it just grabs the first character of whatever they type in. So it works pretty good that way. One way this can be broken, you can't grab the first character of an empty word. So if I just hit enter, oh, it won't even let me. Never mind, you're good. Bam, done. All right, hopefully this has been helpful. Happy coding.